What do you do when an atheist starts dismissing the overwhelming evidence for Christianity? Recently, ex-Christian apologist and famous meme maker Darwin to Jesus provided a thorough takedown of the typical atheist responses to the evidence for Christianity. Let's dive in. Quoting Darwin to Jesus, quote, "Before I begin my response, I need to explain what a cumulative case is and how it works. To illustrate this, consider a murder case. A man's wife is found strangled in their home. And while there's no single piece of evidence that conclusively proves that her husband killed her, but multiple lines of evidence all point in the same direction. We discovered that he had taken out a life insurance policy on her just weeks before her death. She was strangled by someone with large, strong hands, and his hands matched the size and strength of the marks on her neck. Security footage shows that he was the only person to enter the house at the time of the murder. While he was inside, neighbors reported hearing screams and sounds of a struggle. Then, after the time of death, the camera captured him leaving the house. Additionally, it turns out that he was having an affair. Notice that none of these facts taken in isolation prove that he's a murderer. However, when we look at all of these facts together, the best explanation for them is that he's a murderer. This is an example of a cumulative case. Now imagine that instead of addressing the overall weight of the evidence, someone tries to dismiss each point in isolation. Maybe saying just because he was in the house doesn't mean he killed her, which would be correct, but it proves he could have. Or saying just because the neighbors heard screams doesn't mean he was the one causing it. Correct, but given that he and his wife were the only ones inside the house at the time, we should conclude that the screams were caused by the altercation. Just because he had a life insurance policy doesn't mean he wanted her dead. Correct, but it establishes a potential motive. Just because his hands match the strangulation marks doesn't mean he necessarily strangled her. Correct, but the hand size and strength points to her. What I just illustrated above is exactly what virtually all atheists do when confronted with the cumulative case for Christianity. They look at each piece of evidence in isolation and argue that on their own, it doesn't prove Christianity. But that isn't the point of each individual piece of evidence. The point is that when all these different lines of evidence are considered together, they form a powerful case that Christianity is true. So does Tacitus support Christianity? Refuting an atheist's attempts to dismiss the historical evidence for Christianity. The initial claim is that the existence of Jesus, multiple sources outside the Bible reference Jesus, including Roman historians Tacitus and Suetonius, Jewish historians Josephus, and ancient writers Pliny the Younger. The atheist response from Logistrix. This atheist wrote that Tacitus wrote in 116, nearly a century after Jesus' death. He doesn't actually mention Jesus by name, but does refer to Christians and refers to Christ as the origin of their name. He also mentions the method and approximate date of Jesus' death. This can be used to show that Jesus the man lived and was crucified, but does nothing to show that any of the supernatural claims of or about Jesus are true. The Christian response from a former atheist, Darwin to Jesus. If we were trying to prove that Julius Caesar did, in fact, cross the Rubicon, then a necessary first step would be proving that Julius Caesar existed at all. One way to do that would be to cite sources that confirm key aspects of his life, such as his military leadership and political actions. While those sources may not explicitly mention the Rubicon crossing, they still provide crucial substantial support for the broader historical claim. In the same way, one of the foundational claims of Christianity is that Jesus was crucified under Pontius Pilate. If Jesus never existed, and if there was no crucifixion, then Christianity is false, end of story. The evidence from Tacitus corroborates at least this key part of the story, and that's precisely what it's meant to do. Just as the camera showing the man entering his house is only meant to establish that he was there at the correct time and therefore could have committed the murder, the evidence from Tacitus is only meant to establish key parts of Jesus' story. But instead of engaging with this, the atheist moves the goalpost. He admits that Tacitus confirms Jesus' existence and crucifixion, but then argues that it doesn't prove any supernatural claims. That's irrelevant because that wasn't the point of citing Tacitus in the first place. Recall how I said in my introduction to this thread that the atheist will evaluate each individual piece of evidence as if it alone should prove the entire case. That's exactly what just happened here. Even worse, he made a completely disingenuous point about Tacitus not mentioning Jesus by name. Tacitus explicitly refers to Christus, the leader of the Christians, saying Christus, from whom the name Christian had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate. From Tacitus' Annals 1544, this is an unmistakable reference to Jesus Christ. The fact that Tacitus used Christ instead of Jesus is completely irrelevant, just like if somebody referred to me as the husband of, he tags his wife, instead of Darwin to Jesus. This would still obviously mean me. Conclusion. Tacitus is direct historical evidence that Jesus existed and was crucified. The atheist argument about Tacitus not saying Jesus by name is pure nitpicking and completely irrelevant. He also misrepresented my argument by acting as if I were using Tacitus to prove the supernatural, which was never the claim. His response is worthless. He hasn't refuted anything. He's just dodged the argument, misrepresented my point, and fixated on a meaningless detail. The fact remains, Tacitus is external, non-Christian evidence confirming a core claim of Christianity. Atheists claim rationality, yet by and large, they cannot affirm the existence of Jesus, something which was proven historically. It's baffling. Now, we're going to be doing a series on this because Darwin to Jesus is obliged and allowing me to share this material with all of you. And I think it's important. Atheists tend to play a lot of games with the evidence for Christianity. Darwin to Jesus does an excellent job pointing that out and refuting it. Christ is king. Every knee will bow. Absolutely.